Somewhere over Afghanistan, a bomber older than everyone on the ground dropped precision munitions on a Taliban position. The aircraft was built during the Korean War. The pilot's grandparents weren't born yet when it first flew. The weapons it carried didn't exist when the airframe was designed. None of that mattered. The bombs hit their target. The enemy died. The B-52 flew home to do it again tomorrow. This scene repeated itself thousands of times across 2 decades of warfare. And it's been repeating for 7 decades before that. Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, Libya, Syria. The B-52 Stratofortress has dropped more ordnance on America's enemies than any aircraft in history. It's fought in every major conflict since the 1960s. It shows no signs of stopping. The Pentagon expects this aircraft to remain in service until 2050. A bomber designed when televisions were black and white will still be flying combat missions when children born today have children of their own. Nearly a century of continuous service from a single design. Meanwhile, the aircraft built to replace it keep failing. The B-1 is heading to the boneyard. The B-2 was too expensive to buy in numbers. The B-21 is just entering production, and planners have already admitted it won't retire the B-52. Why can't America kill its oldest bomber? The answer involves nuclear standoffs, engineering miracles, a controversial combat record that spans 3 generations, and an uncomfortable truth about military technology. Sometimes the best weapon isn't the most advanced one. It's the one that works no matter what you throw at it. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, American military planners faced a terrifying realization. The next major war would be nuclear. Whoever could deliver atomic weapons to enemy territory first would either win or survive. There would be no second place. The problem was getting those weapons to their target. In 1945, the only delivery method was a manned bomber flying directly over enemy cities. Intercontinental missiles didn't exist yet. The technology was decades away. Everything depended on aircraft that could cross oceans, penetrate enemy airspace, and drop their payloads before being shot down. The B-29 Superfortress that destroyed Japan was already obsolete for this mission. Too slow. Flew too low. Couldn't reach the Soviet heartland from American bases without multiple refueling stops that would leave it vulnerable. The aircraft that ended World War II couldn't fight the next one. The Air Force issued requirements that seemed almost impossible. They needed a bomber capable of flying from the continental United States to Moscow and back without landing. Something that could cruise above Soviet air defenses. Something that could carry nuclear weapons weighing tens of thousands of pounds. Nothing like this had ever been built. Boeing won the contract in 1946 with a design that looked nothing like the aircraft we know today. Their original concept featured straight wings and propeller engines. It would have been obsolete before leaving the factory. But Boeing's engineers kept iterating, kept pushing, kept reimagining what a bomber could be. The breakthrough came during a single weekend in October 1948. A team of Boeing engineers locked themselves in a Dayton, Ohio hotel room with a challenge. Redesign the entire aircraft or lose the contract. They emerged with something revolutionary. Swept wings. 8 jet engines. A configuration that would define strategic bombing for the next century. The prototype flew on April 15, 1952. The Air Force was so impressed they ordered mass production before testing was even complete. Between 1952 and 1962, Boeing built 744 B-52s across 8 variants, from the A model through the H model. Only the B-52H remains in service today. 76 aircraft still flying, all of them built over 60 years ago, all of them still carrying out the mission that started with one simple question. How do you deliver nuclear weapons to the other side of the world? There's an ancient philosophical puzzle called the ship of Theseus. If you replace every plank of a wooden ship over time, is it still the same vessel? The B-52 forces us to confront this question with aluminum and jet fuel instead of philosophy classrooms. The bomber's flying combat missions today share almost nothing with the aircraft that rolled off Boeing's assembly line in the early 1960s. Engines have been swapped out. Avionics have been gutted and rebuilt multiple times. Weapons systems bear zero resemblance to the original nuclear delivery configuration. Cockpit instruments evolved from analog gauges to digital displays. Communication systems, navigation equipment, defensive countermeasures have all been replaced repeatedly. Strip away everything that's been upgraded, and what remains? The skeleton, the aluminum skin, the swept wings, the distinctive nose profile, the fundamental structure that gives the B-52 its shape. This skeleton refuses to die. The B-52H model entered service in 1961. Every aircraft currently flying was built over 60 years ago. Some airframes have been in continuous service across multiple generations of pilots. Grandfathers flew these same aircraft that their grandsons fly today. Not the same model. The same individual aircraft. How does a 60-year-old airframe keep flying when modern aircraft are retired after 20 or 30 years? The answer comes down to paranoid engineering. Boeing's original designers didn't trust their own calculations. Aerospace engineering in the 1950s was still partially guesswork. Computer modeling didn't exist. Wind tunnel testing could only reveal so much. Engineers made their best estimates and then added massive safety margins just in case they were wrong. The B-52 was designed to handle stresses far beyond what normal operations would ever require. Wings that could flex without breaking. Fuselage joints that could absorb punishment for decades. Structural components rated for lifespans that seemed absurdly long at the time. That paranoid overengineering turned out to be accidental genius. The airframe has enough structural life remaining to continue operations for decades more. Engineers have studied these aircraft extensively, looking for fatigue cracks, metal stress, any sign that the skeleton is finally giving out. They keep finding the same answer. The structure is fine. Keep flying. Everything inside the B-52 can be replaced. Engines wear out and get swapped. Avionics become obsolete and get upgraded. Weapons systems evolve and get modified. But the skeleton endures. The aluminum bones that Boeing built in the early 1960s will still be carrying bombs in the 2050s. The ship of Theseus has an answer after all. The B-52 is still the same aircraft because the one thing that can't be replaced never needed replacing. The B-52's most distinctive feature is its engine configuration. 8 turbofan engines mounted in 4 twin pods beneath the swept wings. No other operational aircraft uses this arrangement. There's a reason for that. It's horribly inefficient. When the B-52 was designed, jet engine technology was primitive. Individual engines didn't produce enough thrust to lift a fully loaded bomber. The solution was simple. Add more engines. 8 engines generating moderate thrust could do what 2 powerful engines couldn't. The original engines were Pratt & Whitney J57 turbojet. They were thirsty, smoky, and unreliable by modern standards. The B-52H upgraded to TF-33 turbofans, which improved efficiency somewhat but still fell far short of contemporary engine performance. Those TF-33 engines are still flying today. They've been in service for over 60 years. Finding replacement parts has become an exercise in archaeological engineering. Some components are manufactured by companies that no longer exist. Others require custom fabrication because original specifications have been lost. The Air Force has been trying to replace these engines for decades. The current plan involves installing 8 new Rolls-Royce F-130 engines, which will dramatically improve fuel efficiency, reduce maintenance requirements, and extend the aircraft's operational range. This re-engining program is expected to cost over $11 billion and take until the 2030s to complete. 8 engines also create 8 times the maintenance burden, 8 times the fuel systems, 8 times the potential failure point. A modern bomber design would never use this configuration. But the B-52 wasn't designed for modern efficiency. It was designed for Cold War survival. And it survived. The B-52's original purpose was singular and terrifying: deliver thermonuclear weapons to the Soviet Union. Everything about the aircraft was optimized for this apocalyptic mission. During the height of the Cold War, B-52s maintained continuous airborne alert. Aircraft loaded with nuclear weapons flew 24-hour missions along routes that would allow immediate strikes on Soviet targets if ordered. This operation, called Chrome Dome, kept nuclear-armed bombers in the air at all times between 1960 and 1968. The logic was grimly simple. Bombers on the ground could be destroyed in a surprise Soviet attack. Bombers already airborne could retaliate even if every American air base was vaporized. The B-52 became the airborne leg of the nuclear triad, alongside ground-based intercontinental ballistic missiles and submarine-launched weapons. Pilots trained endlessly for missions they hoped would never happen. They memorized target coordinates in the Soviet Union. They practiced low-level penetration routes designed to evade radar. They understood that if they ever received authentic launch orders, they probably wouldn't be coming home. Not because they'd be shot down, but because there might be nothing left to come home to. The psychological weight was crushing. These weren't combat missions in any traditional sense. They were one-way tickets to participate in human extinction. Some pilots coped through dark humor. Others through rigid compartmentalization. Many struggled with the implications for the rest of their lives. Chrome Dome ended after 2 accidents involving nuclear weapons. In 1966, a B-52 collided with a refueling tanker over Spain, dropping 4 hydrogen bombs near the village of Palomares. In 1968, another B-52 crashed in Greenland, scattering nuclear material across the ice. Neither incident resulted in nuclear detonation, but both demonstrated the risks of keeping armed bombers constantly airborne. The B-52 remains nuclear-capable today. It can carry air-launched cruise missiles equipped with nuclear warhead, but the continuous airborne alert is history. Now nuclear-armed B-52s wait on the ground, ready to launch within minutes if ordered. The B-52 was designed to end civilization. Its entire existence revolved around one apocalyptic mission: fly to the Soviet Union, drop thermonuclear weapons, erase cities from existence. Everything about the aircraft optimized for destroying the modern world in a single afternoon. Instead, it spent its first real war bombing jungle trails. The irony was almost cruel. This magnificent doomsday machine, built to deliver humanity's most powerful weapons against the world's other superpower, found itself hunting guerrilla fighters hiding under triple canopy rainforest. A nuclear sledgehammer swatting at mosquitoes. Operation Arclight began in June 1965, dragging the B-52 into Vietnam. The concept was simple enough. Take the bomber's massive payload capacity designed for nuclear weapons and fill it with conventional high-explosive bombs instead. What could carry one city-killing nuclear device could alternatively carry 70,000 pounds of conventional ordnance. Quantity replacing quality. The results were devastating in the most literal sense. A formation of B-52s dropping full bomb loads could obliterate everything within a rectangular box roughly 2 miles long and half a mile wide. Trees splintered. Earth cratered. Anything living within that zone simply ceased to exist. The Vietnamese called these strikes whispering death. The bombers cruised so high they couldn't be seen from the ground. Their engines couldn't be heard until it was far too late. One moment the jungle was quiet. The next moment the world exploded. Survivors described the experience as pure terror from an invisible source. But measuring actual effectiveness proved far more difficult than measuring destruction. The Air Force dropped more bomb tonnage on Vietnam than it had during the entirety of World War II. Let that sink in. More bombs than the campaign that defeated Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan combined. B-52s flew over 126,000 sorties throughout the conflict. They cratered jungles, destroyed supply lines, and terrorized enemy troops from one end of the country to the other. Yet the war dragged on for years. Supply lines were rebuilt overnight. Guerrilla fighters emerged from tunnels after the bombers passed. The enemy adapted, dispersed, and refused to present the mass targets that strategic bombing required. The United States ultimately withdrew without achieving its objective. Operation Linebacker II in December 1972 represented the peak of B-52 combat operations in Vietnam. For 11 consecutive days, waves of bombers struck targets in and around Hanoi itself. This was the most heavily defended airspace in history at that time. The North Vietnamese threw everything they possessed at the attacking formations. Surface-to-air missiles filled the sky like deadly fireworks. 15 B-52s were shot down during Linebacker II. 33 crew members were killed. Another 33 were captured as prisoners of war, spending months or years in brutal captivity. These losses shook the Air Force's confidence in the bombers' ability to survive against modern air defenses. The invincible nuclear delivery system had proven terrifyingly vulnerable. But the campaign achieved its immediate political objective. North Vietnam returned to peace negotiations. The bombing had applied pressure that diplomacy alone could not. Whether those negotiations actually accomplished anything meaningful remains hotly debated by historians decades later. Vietnam proved something troubling about the B-52. It could destroy anything it could reach. It could devastate landscapes and terrify enemies. But destruction alone couldn't win wars. The apocalypse bomber discovered that some conflicts couldn't be ended with overwhelming firepower. 20 years after Vietnam, the B-52 returned to combat over Iraq. Operation Desert Storm in 1991 showcased how dramatically the bomber's role had evolved. Gone were the massive formation raids against area targets. The new B-52 missions emphasized precision and psychological impact. Bombers carrying cruise missiles could strike targets from hundreds of miles away, never entering Iraqi airspace. Aircraft that did penetrate enemy territory used updated defensive systems to survive threats that would have destroyed their predecessors. The most famous B-52 mission of the Gulf War was also the longest combat sortie in history at that time. 7 B-52s launched from Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, flew directly to Iraq, launched cruise missiles against priority targets, and returned home. The round trip covered 14,000 miles and took 35 hours. Pilots were in the air for a day and a half straight. This mission demonstrated something important. The B-52 didn't need to be stealthy or fast. It just needed to launch weapons from beyond the reach of enemy defenses. The bomber had evolved from a penetrating nuclear delivery system into a standoff missile truck. Iraqi troops learned to fear the sound of approaching B-52s. The psychological impact of carpet bombing hadn't diminished since Vietnam. Entire units surrendered after B-52 strikes, their defensive positions transformed into moonscapes of overlapping craters. Aircrews have called the B-52 the Buff for decades. Officially, this stands for Big Ugly Fat Fellow. Unofficially, the F stands for something else that better reflects how crews actually talk. The nickname captures something essential about the aircraft. The B-52 isn't elegant. It doesn't look like a modern stealth bomber with its sleek angles and radar-absorbing surfaces. It's a blunt instrument, all wings and engines and bomb bay, designed in an era when brute force mattered more than subtlety. But there's affection in that nickname. Crews who fly the Buff tend to love it, despite or perhaps because of its quirks. The aircraft has personality in ways that newer bombers don't. Its analog origins mean that pilots actually fly the plane rather than managing computer systems. The physical controls, the engine noise, the sheer presence of the thing creates a connection that glass cockpits can't replicate. Every B-52 has a story. These airframes have been flying longer than most pilots have been alive. They've been through multiple wars, countless upgrades, and enough training missions to circle the globe thousands of times. The maintenance logs read like novels, documenting decades of repairs, modifications, and close calls. Some aircraft carry artwork dating back to the Vietnam era. Others have been repainted so many times that archaeologists could probably date the layers like tree rings. Each one is unique, with handling quirks that experienced pilots learn to recognize. The B-52 isn't just an aircraft. It's an institution with wings. Numbers mean nothing without context. So let's put the B-52's specifications in terms that actually make sense. The wingspan stretches 185 feet from tip to tip. That's wider than a Boeing 737 airliner is long. Stand at one wingtip and the other is more than half a football field away. When a B-52 taxis past, ground crews experience something closer to a building moving than an aircraft rolling by. From nose to tail, the bomber measures 159 feet. The vertical stabilizer rises over 40 feet above the ground, roughly the height of a four-story building. This is not a subtle aircraft. It dominates every runway it touches and every hangar it enters. Empty weight comes in at approximately 185,000 pounds. That's 92 tons of aluminum, steel, and aerospace engineering before adding a single drop of fuel or a single bomb. For comparison, an empty F-16 fighter weighs about 20,000 pounds. 9 F-16s equal 1 empty B-52. Maximum takeoff weight reaches 488,000 pounds. Nearly 250,000 tons of aircraft, fuel, and weapons attempting to lift off the ground. This makes the B-52 one of the heaviest military aircraft ever mass-produced. Getting that much weight airborne requires serious power. 8 Pratt & Whitney TF-33PW-103 turbofan engines provide that power. Each engine generates 17,000 pounds of thrust. Combined output reaches 136,000 pounds of thrust, enough to push this massive aircraft through the sky at respectable speed. But respectable isn't impressive by fighter standards. Maximum speed reaches only 650 miles per hour at altitude. That's Mach 0.86, well below the speed of sound. Modern fighters routinely exceed Mach 2, more than twice what the B-52 can achieve. In a straight race, almost any combat aircraft built in the last 50 years would leave the bomber behind. Speed, however, was never the point. Combat radius extends approximately 4,480 miles without refueling. That's New York to London and most of the way back on a single tank. With aerial refueling, range becomes essentially unlimited. The B-52 has demonstrated the ability to reach any target on Earth from bases in the continental United States. Fly out, strike the target, fly home. No forward basing required. Service ceiling reaches 50,000 feet, cruising above most weather and many air defense systems. At that altitude, the curvature of Earth becomes visible through the cockpit windows. The bomber operates in a realm where surface threats struggle to reach. Maximum range at high altitude with combat load exceeds 8,800 miles. For context, the circumference of Earth at the equator is roughly 25,000 miles. A B-52 can fly more than a third of the way around the planet without refueling. But range and altitude serve one primary purpose: delivering weapons. This is where the B-52's specifications become truly impressive. The internal bomb bay can carry up to 70,000 pounds of ordnance. External hardpoints add another 50,000 pounds of capacity. Total theoretical payload approaches 120,000 pounds, though typical combat configurations carry around 60,000 pounds to maintain performance margins. 60,000 pounds of weapons. That's more than many World War II bombers weighed fully loaded with fuel, crew, and bombs combined. The B-52 carries an entire vintage bomber's weight in ordnance alone. 5 crew members operate this flying arsenal. The aircraft commander sits in the left seat, overall mission authority. The pilot occupies the right seat, sharing flying duties. Downstairs in a separate compartment, the radar navigator manages weapons delivery, while the navigator handles route planning and terrain avoidance. The electronic warfare officer monitors threats and operates defensive systems. Earlier B-52 variants carried a sixth crew member, a tail gunner operating defensive cannons from an isolated rear position. That role was eliminated as tactics evolved and defensive guns proved less valuable than electronic countermeasures. The tail gun itself was eventually removed, replaced by additional electronic warfare equipment. These specifications have remained surprisingly consistent across 6 decades of service. The airframe's fundamental dimensions haven't changed. Engine performance stays within the same general parameters. What has evolved dramatically is everything inside: the avionics, the weapons, the systems that turn raw specifications into combat capability. The B-52's weapons capability has expanded dramatically from its original nuclear-only mission. Modern aircraft can carry virtually every air-delivered weapon in the American arsenal. Gravity bombs range from 500-pound general-purpose munitions to 2,000-pound penetrators designed to destroy hardened bunkers. The aircraft can carry cluster munitions that scatter smaller bomblets across wide areas. Precision-guided bombs using GPS or laser guidance have largely replaced unguided ordnance for most missions. The AGM-86 air-launched cruise missile gives the B-52 true standoff capability. These missiles can be launched from hundreds of miles away, navigating to their targets using terrain-following radar and GPS. The conventional version carries a 3,000-pound warhead. The nuclear version remains classified but is believed to carry a variable-yield thermonuclear weapon. AGM-158 Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff missiles represent the newest cruise missile capability. These stealthy weapons can strike targets over 600 miles away with precision measured in feet rather than yards. The extended-range version pushes that distance to over 1,000 miles. For maritime missions, the B-52 can carry AGM-84 Harpoon anti-ship missiles. More recently, the aircraft has been adapted to carry the AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missile, which can engage naval targets at ranges exceeding 200 miles. This capability transforms the bomber into a ship killer, threatening enemy fleets from distances they cannot effectively counter. Mines represent another mission set. The B-52 can rapidly deploy naval mines across sea lanes, closing waterways to enemy shipping. During the Vietnam War, B-52s mined North Vietnamese harbors as part of Operation Pocket Money, demonstrating how the bomber could influence naval warfare without ever engaging ships directly. The common theme across all these weapons is range. The B-52 doesn't need to get close to its target. It launches from distances that keep it safe from most air defense systems, letting the weapons do the dangerous work of penetrating enemy airspace. A 70-year-old bomber flying against modern air defenses sounds suicidal. The B-52 survives through electronic warfare systems that have evolved continuously since the aircraft entered service. The AN/YELQ-172 electronic countermeasures system can jam enemy radar, preventing targeting by surface-to-air missiles or enemy fighters. The system detects incoming radar signals, analyzes their characteristics, and broadcasts jamming signals tailored to confuse specific threat type. Chaff dispensers release clouds of metallic strips that create false radar returns. Flare dispensers eject burning countermeasures designed to lure heat-seeking missiles away from the aircraft's engines. These systems can be activated manually by the electronic warfare officer or automatically in response to detected threat. The AN/ALR-46 radar warning receiver alerts crews when enemy radar is tracking them. Different tones indicate different threat types and levels of danger. Pilots and electronic warfare officers learn to interpret these audio cues instantly, responding with appropriate countermeasures before enemy weapons can be launched. Newer systems include the AN/YELQ-221 Advanced Electronic Warfare Suite, which integrates multiple countermeasure systems into a coordinated defensive package. This upgrade reflects decades of lessons learned about what actually works against modern air defenses. But the B-52's primary defense isn't electronic. It's tactical. Modern B-52 missions keep the aircraft well away from enemy air defense systems. Standoff weapons launch from hundreds of miles away. Flight routes are planned to avoid known threat locations. The bomber operates in environments where air superiority has already been established by fighter aircraft and suppression of enemy air defense missions. When the B-52 can't avoid threats entirely, it relies on support. Fighter escorts, electronic warfare aircraft, and anti-radar missiles clear the path. The bomber rarely operates alone in contested airspace. Flying a B-52 is unlike any other experience in military aviation. Missions routinely last 10 to 12 hours. Some extend to 20 hours or more. Crew members must manage fatigue, maintain focus, and remain ready for action during flights longer than most people stay awake. The aircraft has limited provisions for rest. There's no bunk, no comfortable seating. Just 5 crew stations in a noisy, vibrating aluminum tube. The cockpit sits remarkably high above the ground, giving pilots an unusual perspective during taxi and takeoff. The nose gear is so far forward that the aircraft seems to balance precariously on its main landing gear. This configuration requires unusual landing technique. Pilots must manage crosswinds carefully to avoid dragging the wing-mounted outrigger gear. Those outrigger gears, small wheels mounted near the wingtips, exist because the wings flex so dramatically during flight. On the ground, they prevent the wingtips from scraping the runway. In the air, the wings can flex upward by several feet under full fuel load. First-time passengers often panic watching the wings bend, assuming something is breaking. Experienced crews barely notice. Communication between crew stations relies on the intercom system. The 5 crew members can speak to each other, coordinate actions, and share information without radio transmissions that enemy forces might intercept. Building crew coordination takes months of training. Effective B-52 crews function as single organisms, anticipating each other's actions without conscious thought. The navigator and radar navigator work in a downstairs compartment, physically separated from the pilot. They manage weapons delivery, terrain avoidance, and much of the mission planning that occurs in flight. This separation creates unique challenges. The pilots can't see what the navigators are doing. The navigators can't see out the windows. Trust becomes essential. Of the 744 B-52s built, only 76 remain in active service. Where did the rest go? Most went to Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, where the Aerospace Maintenance and Regeneration Group maintains the world's largest aircraft boneyard. Rows of decommissioned B-52s bake in the desert sun, their aluminum slowly oxidizing in the dry climate that preserves them better than any other environment. Under arms control treaties with Russia, many B-52s were destroyed in ways that could be verified by satellite. Aircraft were cut into pieces using enormous guillotines. Wings separated from fuselages. Fuselages sliced into sections. The destruction was photographed and transmitted to Soviet observers as proof that America was complying with treaty obligations. These images became iconic representations of arms control in action. Massive bombers that once threatened nuclear annihilation reduced to aluminum scrap by their own country in the name of peace. But the boneyard isn't just a graveyard. It's also a parts warehouse. When operational B-52s need components that are no longer manufactured, maintenance crews turn to the stored aircraft. Wings, engines, landing gear, avionics boxes, wiring harnesses, anything usable gets stripped from the decommissioned bombers and installed in flying aircraft. This cannibalization has kept the B-52 fleet operational long past when parts availability should have grounded it. Some components in flying aircraft might have originally been installed in bombers that were retired decades ago. The planes stay alive by consuming their dead. Bring a 1960s B-52 crew member forward in time. Sit them in a modern Stratofortress cockpit. They would recognize almost nothing. The basic shape would feel familiar. Same swept wings. Same 8-engine configuration. Same general cockpit layout with pilot and commander sitting side by side. Everything else would seem like science fiction transported from a future they couldn't have imagined. Where analog gauges once dominated instrument panels, digital displays now present information in formats that didn't exist when these aircraft were built. Where navigators once plotted courses using celestial observations and dead reckoning calculations, GPS systems now pinpoint position within meters. Where bombing computers required manual inputs and mechanical calculations, digital processors now manage weapons delivery with precision measured in feet rather than football field. The 1960s crew member would understand the aircraft's purpose: deliver weapons to targets. But the means of accomplishing that mission would be utterly alien. This transformation happened gradually across 6 decades of continuous upgrade. Each modification addressed specific limitations. Each improvement built upon previous changes. The cumulative effect turned a Cold War bomber into something its original designers couldn't have conceived. The offensive avionics system upgrade in the 1980s marked the first major transformation. Analog bombing computers gave way to digital systems capable of precision weapon delivery. What had been a carpet bomber suddenly became capable of hitting specific buildings rather than general areas. The same airframe that once planned to destroy entire cities could now destroy individual rooms within those cities. GPS navigation followed, eliminating techniques that dated back to ancient mariners. Original B-52 navigators used stars, ground references, and mathematical calculations to determine position. Accuracy depended on skill, weather, and luck. Modern systems know exactly where the aircraft is at all times, regardless of conditions. The uncertainty that defined early navigation simply vanished. Data link systems created connections that early crews couldn't have imagined. Modern B-52s can receive targeting information while airborne, adapting to changing tactical situations in real time. A bomber can launch without knowing its specific targets, receiving coordinates en route as intelligence develops. The 1960s concept of fixed mission planning has been replaced by dynamic flexibility. Communication upgrades integrated the B-52 into networked combat environments where information flows constantly between aircraft, drones, satellites, ships, and ground controllers. The isolated bomber conducting independent missions has become a connected node in a vast military information system. Current modernization efforts push even further into territory that 1960s engineers couldn't have conceived. Radar modernization will replace the AN/APQ-166 with an active electronically scanned array system. This new radar provides dramatically improved ground mapping, weather detection, and targeting capability. The mechanical scanning of older systems gives way to electronic beam steering that can track multiple targets simultaneously while mapping terrain and avoiding threat. The engine replacement program represents the most significant physical change to the aircraft in decades. New Rolls-Royce F-130 engines will replace the TF-33 turbofans that have powered B-52s since the 1960s. Efficiency improvements of up to 40% will extend range, reduce tanker requirements, and slash maintenance demand. The program will cost over $11 billion and take until the 2030s to complete. Internal weapons bay modifications will accommodate weapons that didn't exist when the aircraft was designed. Hypersonic missiles traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5 require different mounting systems than conventional bombs. The rotary launcher that has served for decades will be replaced with new systems capable of handling these advanced munitions. By the time all current upgrades are complete, the B-52 will be more capable than at any previous point in its history. Radar that sees further. Engines that fly longer. Weapons that strike faster. communications that connect everywhere. Only the aluminum skeleton will remain from the original 1960s aircraft. Everything else will be new. That time-traveling crew member would climb into a modern B-52 and find themselves in an aircraft wearing familiar skin but possessing capabilities beyond their wildest imagination. Same bones. Completely different beast. The Air Force has been trying to replace the B-52 for over 50 years. Every attempt has failed. The B-1 Lancer was supposed to be the successor. This supersonic bomber featured variable sweep wings, advanced avionics, and low-altitude penetration capability that would allow it to sneak beneath Soviet radar. President Carter canceled the program in 1977, arguing that cruise missiles made manned bombers obsolete. President Reagan revived it in 1981. The B-1 finally entered service in 1986. But the B-1 never replaced the B-52. It supplemented the fleet without making the older bomber obsolete. The B-1's mechanical complexity created maintenance nightmares. Its operating costs exceeded projections. The aircraft that was supposed to be cheaper and more capable turned out to be expensive and problematic. Today, the B-1 fleet is being retired while the B-52 keeps flying. The B-2 Spirit was the next attempt at replacement. This flying-wing stealth bomber can penetrate the most advanced air defenses on Earth without being detected. It's a technological marvel. It's also spectacularly expensive. Only 21 were built, at a cost of over $2 billion each. The Air Force wanted 132. Budget reality intervened. The B-2 performs missions the B-52 cannot, penetrating defended airspace to strike high-value targets. But there aren't enough B-2s to replace the B-52's capacity for delivering massive amounts of ordnance. The stealth bomber handles surgical strike. The Buff handles sledgehammer blows. The B-21 Raider is the newest attempt. This stealth bomber is currently entering production, with the Air Force planning to acquire at least 100 aircraft. It will eventually replace the B-2 and the B-1. But not the B-52. Current plans keep the Buff operational alongside the B-21 through at least 2050. The Air Force has apparently concluded that the B-52 fills a role that no other aircraft can match cost-effectively. It's not glamorous. It's not stealthy. It's not fast. It's just irreplaceable. Taliban fighters learned to fear a specific sound. Distant engine rumble at high altitude. Contrails stretching across Afghan skies. When those signs appeared, devastation followed. The B-52 became a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. Fighters who survived strikes described absolute terror. The bombers flew too high to see clearly. Too high to shoot at effectively. But their weapons arrived with devastating precision. One moment a compound stood intact. The next moment it was a crater. This psychological impact required no ordnance at all. Sometimes B-52s simply flew over enemy positions without dropping anything. The effect was the same. Fighters scattered. Operations disrupted. Fear accomplished what bombs would have. From the beginning of the War on Terror through American withdrawal from Afghanistan, the B-52 remained in continuous combat deployment. 2 decades of operational missions that nobody predicted for a Cold War relic. The same aircraft designed to vaporize Soviet cities dropped precision-guided bombs on Taliban positions, sometimes within hundreds of yards of friendly forces. Controllers on the ground designated targets with lasers. Bomber crews released GPS-guided munitions. Weapons that once would have missed by hundreds of feet now struck within meters of aim point. Iraq saw similar employment during the 2003 invasion and subsequent counterinsurgency operations. Shock and awe included B-52 strikes against military installations. Later operations supported ground forces fighting insurgents in urban environments. Against ISIS, bombers flew from Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, striking targets across Syria and Iraq. The aircraft's ability to loiter for hours made it ideal for dynamic situations where opportunities emerged suddenly and demanded immediate response. Libya in 2011 saw cruise missile launches against Gaddafi's air defenses, helping establish the no-fly zone that contributed to the regime's collapse. Across every theater, flexibility defined the B-52's modern role. Nuclear bomber to close air support. Strategic weapon to counter-terrorism platform. The aircraft adapted to missions its designers never imagined. As American strategic focus shifts toward potential conflict with China, the B-52 is once again adapting to new requirements. The Pacific Ocean presents unique challenges for air power. Distances are vast. Bases are scattered across islands separated by thousands of miles of water. China's anti-access capabilities threaten aircraft carriers and forward bases that American forces have relied upon for decades. The B-52's range becomes crucial in this environment. Bombers can operate from bases in Guam, Australia, or even the continental United States, striking targets across the western Pacific without needing vulnerable forward positions. Air refueling extends this reach even further. New anti-ship missiles transform the B-52 into a maritime strike platform. A single bomber carrying long-range anti-ship missiles can threaten enemy naval formations at distances exceeding 500 miles. A formation of B-52s could saturate Chinese naval defenses with more missiles than they could effectively counter. Bomber task forces have begun deploying to the Pacific more frequently. These rotational deployments demonstrate American capability and commitment while providing aircrews with experience operating in the theater where they might one day fight. The irony is thick. The B-52 was designed to fly from America to bomb Russia. It spent its combat career striking targets in Southeast Asia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Now it's preparing for potential conflict in the same Pacific region where American forces fought during World War II. The bomber designed for one war has now served through 3 generations of conflict without ever performing its original mission. The B-52's next evolution involves weapons that didn't exist when the aircraft was designed. Hypersonic missiles, traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5, represent the cutting edge of military technology, and the B-52 will carry them. The AGM-183 air-launched rapid response weapon was intended to be the first operational hypersonic missile carried by the B-52. Testing challenges have delayed the program, but development continues. When operational, this weapon will allow the bomber to strike targets at distances and speeds that current air defenses cannot counter. The rationale for using a 70-year-old bomber to carry next-generation weapons seems counterintuitive, but it makes perfect sense when you understand the economics. Developing a new aircraft to carry hypersonic missiles would cost billions and take over a decade. The B-52 already exists. Its payload capacity can accommodate the new weapons. Its range can deliver those weapons to launch points within striking distance of any target on Earth. Why build something new when something old works perfectly well? The combination of ancient airframe and futuristic weapon captures everything about the B-52's impossible longevity. The plane itself is almost irrelevant. What matters is getting weapons to where they need to be launched. The B-52 does that job as well as any aircraft ever built. Future upgrades will likely continue this pattern. Whatever new weapons America develops, the B-52 will probably carry them. The airframe has become a permanent feature of American air power, adapting to whatever the future requires. When something breaks on a B-52, finding a replacement becomes an archaeological expedition. Components that were common in the 1960s haven't been manufactured in decades. The companies that built them no longer exist. The factories were demolished. The tooling was scrapped. The engineers who understood the original designs have retired or passed away. Institutional knowledge that took decades to accumulate has simply vanished. Maintenance crews face impossible puzzles daily. A failed component might require searching through warehouses of decommissioned aircraft for surviving spares, or fabricating replacements from scratch using specifications documented on paper systems that modern computers can't read, or reverse engineering parts from physical examples because original blueprints have been lost. This part's obsolescence creates costs that newer aircraft don't face. Every hour spent hunting for components is an hour not spent actually fixing aircraft. Every custom fabrication costs more than mass-produced replacements would. Every workaround introduces potential reliability issues. The 8 TF-33 engines exemplify the problem. These turbofans have been flying since the 1960s. Finding parts has become an exercise in industrial archaeology. The engine replacement program, costing over $11 billion, exists partly because maintaining the old engines has become unsustainably expensive and complicated. Fuel consumption adds another cost burden. Those elderly engines burn more fuel than modern alternatives would require. Every B-52 mission costs more in fuel than equivalent missions by more efficient aircraft. Across thousands of sorties annually, the waste accumulates. Environmental concerns have emerged that 1960s designers never considered. The TF-33 engines produce emissions that wouldn't be acceptable in new aircraft designs. Hydraulic fluids, lubricants, and other materials include compounds now recognized as harmful. Modernization programs address some issues, but the aircraft will never be as clean as purpose-built replacements. Critics argue the money poured into B-52 upgrades represents massive opportunity costs. Billions spent on engines, avionics, and weapons integration could theoretically fund new aircraft development. Every dollar invested in 60-year-old airframes is a dollar not spent on next-generation platforms. But here's the uncomfortable math that ends every debate. Those theoretical replacements would cost tens of billions more than B-52 upgrade. Development would take decades. Testing and deployment would extend timelines further. By the time a replacement achieved operational status, the B-52 would have provided additional decades of service that no alternative could match. The bomber continues flying because the alternatives are worse. Not because the costs are low. Because the costs of replacement are even higher. The B-52 Stratofortress will celebrate its 100th birthday in service. Let that sink in. An aircraft designed during the Truman administration will still be flying combat missions when children born today have grandchildren of their own. No one planned for this. The original designers expected the B-52 to serve maybe 20 years before replacement. The Air Force expected successive generations of bombers to make the Buff obsolete. Defense planners expected nuclear deterrence to evolve beyond manned aircraft entirely. Instead, the B-52 became something that military aviation has never seen before or since. An aircraft so perfectly suited to its role that nothing else could replace it. A platform so adaptable that it outlived its own obsolescence. A weapon system so cost-effective that newer alternatives couldn't compete. The bomber has dropped more ordnance on America's enemies than any other aircraft in history. It has served in every major conflict since the Korean War. It has evolved from nuclear apocalypse machine to precision strike platform to cruise missile truck to potential hypersonic weapon carrier. Each transformation seemed impossible until it happened. There's a lesson here about military technology that the Pentagon has learned and relearned across 7 decades. The best weapon isn't always the newest or the most advanced. Sometimes it's the one that works, that's available, that can do the job today rather than promising to do it better someday. The B-52 does the job. It has always done the job. It will continue doing the job until someone finally builds something that does it better. So far, no one has.